Welcome back to the Albany Made podcast. This is Sarah, and before we get started, I want to say a big and sincere thank you to the readers of the Alt Weekly for naming us Best Podcast. We're so happy people are listening. One of the most important values of libraries, which was illustrated so elegantly by the Hafu Bodhi blog, is libraries are for everyone. This idea propels us forward to explore new and innovative ways to provide services at our libraries and outside our libraries to those who can't visit in person. And today's episode highlights an outreach effort that exemplifies libraries are for everyone. On Tuesday, September 12th, Deanna DiCarlo, the Adult and Outreach Services Manager of the Upper Hudson Library System, and I traveled to the Brooklyn Public Library's Central Branch to speak with Nick Higgins, Michael Carey, and Nick Franklin about Tell a Story, a library program that connects families to incarcerated loved ones through video conferencing. We visited with the goal of learning how to provide this service to families in Albany and Rensselaer counties. After getting to the nuts and bolts of the program logistics, we asked them to talk about the program for the podcast. And here's where the message comes through. Libraries are for everyone. From Brooklyn Public Library, here are Nick Higgins, Michael Carey, and Nick Franklin.
I'm Nick Higgins. I'm the Director of Outreach Services at the Brooklyn Public Library.
And I'm Michael Carey. I'm the Televisit Services Coordinator at the Brooklyn Public Library.
And I'm Nick Franklin. I'm the Jail and Prison Library Services Coordinator at Brooklyn Public Library.
So do you want to talk about how televisiting started, Mr. Higgins?
How televisiting started at the library. So we've had a relationship with the City Department of Corrections for a number of years, and our bedrock services are the things that Nick Franklin oversees, which are on-site jail-based library services, so trading books with people in their housing areas. We've also, for a number of years, run some early literacy programs for parents who are incarcerated. And we found that we wanted to engage or bridge some of the folks that we're seeing in Rikers Island back to the community in much more concrete ways. So we decided to look around for different program models. I was working with a partner over at the New York Society for Ethical Culture who was doing video visitation with older adults who were in nursing homes in upstate New York. And he was doing telepsychology through this Manhattan office to an upstate facilities, upstate nursing homes. And we had talked about how this could be applied to people who are incarcerated in the city to make it easier for families to connect, basically. And to me, that just made perfect sense. It's what a public library does. We have spaces where kids can read books with their parents, just like I read books with my kids at my local library. And it seemed like public libraries are welcoming, inclusive community spaces, and there's no stigma attached to come in no matter what need you have. And we decided to really advocate for the services to be located inside public libraries in the city, and that's how it started.
Yeah, and I remember about 4 years ago sitting in the office and working out the strategy for doing outreach to Rikers Island, certainly, but also prison in Sunset Park and some other facilities around the city. And in came Nick Higgins with a TV cart and a camera attached to it and said, "Hey, guess what we're going to be doing?" And so I had to pretty much drop some of my plans and figure out how to coordinate doing library services at Rikers Island in the morning, and then coming over in the afternoon, setting up for a Tell a Story televisiting session in the evening. That started to build capacity. We started having the need for software to organize what we were doing and sort of try and keep track of it, and we were kind of flummoxed in some ways by how we were going to keep track of these visits when we started building capacity. It was increasing in popularity, especially the idea of televisiting was taking off, and the opportunity was being sort of cast as maybe we were biting off a little bit more than we could chew, as far as like promising to a father that he was going to be able to visit with his kid every week, but there was a long line of people who wanted to do this program. So we sort of had to manage expectations, and at the same time look for somebody who was going to take all of this stuff, all of this yarn, and make it into something prettier.
So it sounds like you had way too much to do, and we're passing it over to Michael.
Well, I started in November 2016, and at that stage, Telestory was happening in 4 libraries, including Central. But later in November, it expanded to 12 libraries in the Brooklyn system, as well as a number of libraries in NYPL and the Queen's Library system. So now we've gone from doing maybe 5 or 6 visits a week at 4 locations to doing, around 30 to 40 visits a week at these 12 locations. So I've seen this real increase in volume, and many different formulations of families using the service as well. A lot of children visiting with their incarcerated parents, but we have parents visiting with incarcerated children, we have cousins visiting, we have partners visiting, and we've seen the program really thrive, with support from New York City Council as well. That was really essential.
Sort of based on it doesn't come out of the sky. I mean, these programs to connect families really do impact positively incarceration or recidivism rates for people. So research tells us that it doesn't matter what kind of visit a person has when he or she is incarcerated. If you have visits with a family member who's incarcerated, that does impact positively your likelihood of going back to prison after you get out. So these are, again, like the libraries are spaces where anyone can feel welcome, anyone can come in. It's not a reentry organization. It has nothing to do with the criminal justice system. So you have families who are involved in the criminal justice system, and every aspect of their lives are touched by the criminal justice system, but not at a library. So as far as anyone knows, people who look into these glassed-in rooms will see a family sort of together with toys and books in the background, and they're kind of like gesturing at a TV and laughing and singing, but it could just be any family being together, and I think that's what makes it such a powerful tool in this sort of approach to criminal justice reform, community-based solutions that directly affect a specific community need, and that's the power of a public library, quite frankly.
So my background was in prison reentry work. So I worked for a long time at a program that helped people coming out of the New York State prison system, but also the New York City jail system, get access to higher education. So when I loved the idea of this program, because it happened in a library, and a library is a trusted community institution, and I was thinking, right away, these families aren't necessarily regular library users, although some of them are. And how can we really sort of touch these families in a meaningful way and get them connected to the supports they're going to need and the supports that their incarcerated family members are going to need? So, that's the kind of long-term goal here, is the vision of branch libraries being resource centres, not just for the reentry population or formerly incarcerated people and their families, but for all of these marginalised populations that live in our communities, that make up our communities.
Yeah, I think that's definitely right. I mean, you're talking about a library spaces, and in public libraries we fancy ourselves as being entirely inclusive and democratic, but what does that actually look like? It looks like programs like this, and it has to be absolutely normal for a public library to be engaged in this kind of work. Otherwise, like when you go out there and you talk about inclusion and you talk about diversity and you talk about democracy, I mean, it doesn't really hold water unless you're really targeting and having specific services for people who find themselves increasingly marginalized in your communities. So that's, again, it doesn't have to be tell a story. It doesn't have to be a video visitation program for people, but there has to be some sort of conscious and thoughtful effort to make sure you're taking care of everyone who walks through your doors. And it's not an easy thing, and it's not a very quick process. It's sort of like an ongoing relationship building process, not only with the people that you're trying to create services for, but also making sure there are other people in the library who might not need those services, who are also, in the end, they're looking out for those folks too. I mean, that's demonstrating that to your community is also what this program is trying to do.
Yeah, and certainly within the jail, it was providing programs and providing book services has always been something that the New York City libraries have engaged in. It's always been a welcome program. Just the effect of being able to offer a service like this brings it full circle. And I mean, one of the greatest things about it is that when you're describing the program to people that you've been lending books to for a long time, they just look at it like you get it. You understand what our needs are. You're not just here to educate or provide an educational resource. You're not just here to promote what library programs are doing elsewhere in the city. You're doing something to bring us back into the community, and in a really tangible way. So it's really nice to be able to see that side of things too.
We're painting a very rosy picture of all of this, but maybe we should talk about how much we failed in this program too. I mean, it takes a lot of work and a lot of effort, and all the pieces weren't there at all times of the program. And it was literally, myself and Nick, Franklin, who were carrying this program, this pilot, for a year and a half, and we made every single mistake at least 10 times, And it was a brand new program for any public library to do. Certainly was a brand new program for the Department of Corrections. They're entrenched in policies, and we think we're bad at public libraries. But the Department of Corrections has policies for everything, and to introduce something this different to their usual order of business was very difficult. Yeah, a lot of it was, and Nick, you can speak to this too, and Michael too. I mean, it was just managing sort of the disappointment sometimes when families don't have an opportunity to connect, whether it's because of a technical difficulty or because maybe the family members didn't show up and just didn't show up for the visit. But that, for me, that's the most difficult part of this program. It's working, but I don't know, you guys.
Yeah, we had certainly in the early days we had a lot more instances where families couldn't show up, or maybe even through the way we were scheduling, we didn't realize how ambitious we were with families scheduling and asking them to basically take off from work or bring their child home from school early to do this. And we just started building a standard for engaging with the incarcerated person, whether or not their family showed up, just bringing in other forms of conversation, other connections that they might have. We might do an impromptu resume building workshop. We might just sort of chat with them for a while, not just sort of be an anonymous provider that couldn't give them the program that day, but be the face that was on the other side of the screen just for the time being, as a consolation for not being able to see their family. But that happened quite a bit. Technical glitches would occur much more frequently in the early days, and I think as we've built up the program, we've seen the decline in those technical problems, just because people who provide all of those services now understand what the program is and how vital it is not to press the wrong button or have the wrong connection or take off early. So that's been really good.
Yeah, I think definitely like managing family expectations is the most difficult part of this. Like, you know, kids who are expecting to see dad and the call drops or doesn't connect at all. That's a really difficult situation. But you know, as Nick Franklin was saying, I think, you know, as the program's built, we've been very aware of what it's like on the DOC side too. So we're using the same system that is used to connect to the courts. So that provides sort of certain limits for what we can do. We only have access to the technology after 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So we're typically scheduling families between 3 and closing time at the library. But it also means on the DOC side that they have to man those video teleconference units beyond what they used to. And you know, as the program's gone on and we've sort of established some kind of workflow, a lot of that stuff sort of figured itself out. So, you know, we went through some teething issues, but we're operating at 4 times, 5 times the volume that we were, with less problems now. And I think, you know, that's largely based on the relationship we've developed with DOC.
Good folks dance, drunken walks down at the Green Fly Inn. There's murders and thieves, but none that you'll see down at the Green Fly Inn. I had a good job, and after work every day we go drink at the Green Fly Inn. But the job didn't last, so wind broke so fast down at the Green Fly Inn.
So a televisit is usually scheduled for an hour. It happens in the central library. It happens in a room that's about 10 feet by 15. It has a glass wall that looks out into the main body of the library. We set up a screen with the back of the screen against the window so people don't see what's on the screen. They just see the family interacting with the screen. If children are going to be involved in the visit, we have a kids' book cart. It's got a bunch of books, soft toys, drawing materials, etc. We bring that in. We try to make the room as welcoming for the family as we possibly can. If it's a family's first visit, we ask them to get here a little early so that we can talk with them about expectations of the visit, what's going to happen. One thing that I learned early on, you've got to give people a 5-minute warning when the call's about to end. There's nothing worse than seeing a little kid when the screen goes blank and they didn't get a chance to say goodbye. And then we just sort of check in on the family once we've got the video connection made, the sound is good, etc. The family's comfortable in the room, and we step out and let them have their call. Usually check in, 10-15 minutes into the visit just to make sure that everything's okay, and then give them the 5-minute warning towards the end of the call. So it's a typical visit, right?
You're looking into a video booth on the jail side where Dad's sitting, and the background is far less sunny and inviting. There are no toys or anything like that. It's usually just a very drab sort of kind of brick kind of background or cinder block background. But it doesn't matter. All of that stuff certainly just sort of fades out because there are two people or their families who are connecting, and they that's what's paramount. to this. And I mean, another thing is that all these visits are free. That's like one of the guiding principles of this. There are actually 3 of them. It has to be free for people to use. It has to be accessible, and that's why we chose like up to, we have 12 sites now that we're operating out of, and it's expanded across the city. So there are video booths in libraries across the city, so they're accessible for people who want to use it. And the third principle is that it doesn't replace in-person visits. So the hope is, and hopefully the expectation is for families once they visit with us through video, that they'll also make more visits in person, because nothing can really replace that, certainly not video. And we try to encourage that as much as we can. So those 3 things are sort of the guiding principles of this program.
And one of the findings of this recent Vera Institute report was that people who took part in televisits in Washington State were more likely to get in-person visits from their families. So that it was certainly, televisits certainly weren't replacing in-person visits. They were actually sort of bolstering the number of visits that people were getting.
And not for nothing, but there are like companies out there, and we discussed this earlier in our conversation, that telecommunications companies who are creating contracts with local municipalities, they oftentimes will, if video visitation exists in another city or another state, oftentimes the family members will get charged for those visits. And in some instances, those contracts also stipulate that if you have video visitation in your community, then in-person visits are completely cut off. And so there is that trend that's happening across the country. So it's another reason why public institutions like libraries and other community-based organizations have a certain commitment or obligation to the community to offer something, a model that is different, and I would also venture to say a much more morally constructed model of service, and that's sort of what we're also aiming at here in this program.
Yeah, there are certain parts of the country where in-person visits have been replaced by televisits, but it's the worst of both worlds, because they have video booths set up actually at the facility, so you still have to go to the facility to sit in a video booth to have a conversation with someone who's incarcerated there. We shouldn't finish on that. But
no, that was
it's a really crappy way to finish. But
bring us back around to what's been most rewarding for each of you.
Oh, just the reaction of families when they connect. There was a mother who was visiting with her son last night. She got stuck in traffic, so I was sort of chatting with her son for a little while. He was obviously really excited and anxious for his mum to get here. And when she finally did, he was beaming when she walked in the door. So just that human response. That's what we do it for.
That's right. And I mean, secondarily, probably say the ability to show off what the libraries are capable of doing beyond just standard library programs, being able to connect again, bring it full circle to, from our libraries reaching out and promoting our programs. We're actually promoting these people coming back to their community, and they feel really good about it. And you can see a lot of the kind of rediscovery of our public library in Brooklyn as an institution that they want to go back to. It feels really good.
And I'd have to echo everything that was said, but it's about the families who use this. We have a mom who visits with her incarcerated son on a regular basis in South Brooklyn, and she is afraid to go and visit him in person because of her, she's an undocumented.
She doesn't have an ID.
She doesn't have an ID, and she's just afraid of showing up at this place and what might happen to her. So, her use of this video service was something that we didn't even envision, that application of it, and she's just making it her own and making it work for her family. And
I get her smiley emoji every Thursday morning after her visit on Wednesday night.
We hope to bring Tell a Story to the Arbor Hill branch of Albany Public Library soon. Thank you to Nick Higgins, Michael Carey, Nick Franklin, and the staff at Brooklyn Public Library for hosting us, speaking for the podcast, and for all their help and support to bring Tell a Story upstate.
Though I was justified, now I wander out among the pines. Like a panther, I'm steady, moving bootleg whiskey, since there ain't no more green flying. Well, good folks dance a drunken waltz down at the green flying. There's murders and thieves, but none that you'll see down at the green flying. Down at the green flying. Down at the green flying.
Our podcast is produced by Sarah Clark, engineered by Ryan Slowey in the Albany Made Creative Lab. Theme song by Ryan Devine. We'll be back soon with another episode of the Albany Made Podcast. Thanks again for listening.